Hey everybody, how are you doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel where today we are officially in the first week of June 2022, which feels absolutely crazy. I do not know how we got here this fast, but here we are. And in the first week of June, there's a lot of stuff that we're expecting to start happening pretty soon. And so I felt it was a good time to come back and revisit everyone's favorite topic, theories about a Nintendo Direct. So there's definitely a lot to dive into and pick apart here when we consider discussing a Nintendo Direct for June of 2022. This, of course, is the month that we normally see E3, but in a post-pandemic world, E3 has been sort of a weird thing. In fact, all in-person gaming conventions, or even digital conventions, have been very strange since the pandemic. I mean, the gaming industry, I think we all know, has been changed as a result of the pandemic, as many industries have been. And so this year we were expecting E3 in person, then they said it's not in person, it's going to be digital again, then they said it's canceled altogether, even digital E3 is not happening. Then we saw companies like Microsoft and Devolver Digital and so many others start to kind of jump on board the Summer Games Fest, all filling in the week of E3 that we're used to seeing. And because of that, as I discussed in a video and many others have also discussed, we're all sort of expecting Nintendo to do the same thing and hopefully, fingers crossed, announce a Nintendo Direct for next week. Before we dive any deeper into the Nintendo Direct topic today, I like to remind you guys I'm always trying to grow the channel here on Rule of Two Review. I upload every single week and I talk about all things Nintendo and Metroid and all things gaming. So as you watch this video, if you seem to like what I'm doing and what you hear, then I hope you will consider subscribing to the channel. So like I said, a lot of this conversation that I've been having with you guys on my channel and on Twitter, as well as many other people have been having, is that as E3 was canceled, we then started to see companies, again like Microsoft being the most notable one and plenty of others, start to jump on board for doing some kind of presentation or update about their products next week, the second week of June, which again is when we normally see E3 happen. A lot of us started to think, why wouldn't Nintendo want to do the same thing? Just because E3 isn't happening doesn't mean that they can't still have some kind of summer showcase, whether it's labeled E3 or Summer Direct or just a normal Direct, whatever, to do something during this time frame to show off some of their biggest products and get people hyped for things that they're making or surprises that we don't know about, and have that happen during the time that we normally expect E3. If other companies are willing to do it, why wouldn't Nintendo do the same thing? We always see them have a big presence at E3. Even once they left the press conference stage, they've still been having regular direct presentations that have been tied to E3 ever since that happened in 2013. So even without E3, it feels like it's worthwhile for Nintendo to still show something. And so that's kind of where we are. Next week is that E3 week. Microsoft and Summer Games Fest and other companies are showing stuff. We have to assume Nintendo will do the same thing. So today, the day that I'm recording this, is the morning of Friday, June 3rd. And I think that there's a couple of options that we might see happen if, and if being the optimal word here, if Nintendo does decide to hold a Nintendo Direct and announce it sometime soon. What we have to remember is that typically, Nintendo only announces a regular Nintendo Direct like a day or 2 days before the show actually happens. If it was an E3 Direct, if E3 was happening and they were doing the same thing, they would have announced what their date and time frame for their Nintendo Direct would be weeks and weeks and weeks ahead of time, maybe even a month or two, right? Because E3 is a scheduled kind of collection of events from the entire industry and multiple companies all in one sort of thing. And when that happens, Nintendo lets us know again way ahead of time because it's a pre-scheduled thing that is tied to schedules other companies are doing. Now it's different. There is no E3, so every company, Microsoft, EA, Devolver, whatever, can just announce their schedules whenever they want, ahead of time, at whatever schedule makes sense for them. And so that means that if Nintendo is going to hold a Direct, it's just going to be a normal Direct. It doesn't have to be announced weeks ahead of time. So if they're only going to announce it a day or two before it happens, well, for all we know, it could be happening, Monday or Tuesday, and they wouldn't announce it until Saturday or Sunday. or it's going to happen Thursday next week, in which case it might be Tuesday or Wednesday. So there's still plenty of time for them to let us know when they could actually be doing a direct, and for all we know, it's only the following day that we're going to see it happen. I think at the end of the day, it's really just worthwhile for me to tell you that I just do think Nintendo is going to be holding a direct. Yes, it would be nice if we already knew about it like a lot of people feel, but as I just was saying, that's not how Nintendo does normal directs. This isn't a typical E3. We all keep calling it E3 just because this is the weeks and month that we normally see E3, but that's not what it is. It's not actually E3. And so any day could be a day that we wake up in the morning and Nintendo announced a Nintendo Direct for the following day. And so I think whether it's this week or even the week after, sometime in the month of June, probably the week of Microsoft show, we're going to see Nintendo hold a Nintendo Direct. I just believe it's going to happen. Leaks and rumors are one thing, but if we just use our logic and our deductive reasoning, and the fact that most of us are used to following how Nintendo does things, there's no reason to not expect a Nintendo Direct in the next week or two. So I'm just going to firmly say that my prediction is yes, we're going to see some kind of Summer Direct happen. And boy, if it does happen, I think it's going to be a huge Direct. I think some of the obvious things to expect at a Summer Direct would be updates on Bayonetta 3 and Splatoon 3 and Xenoblade Chronicles 3. It's the 3 threes, right, that we know are all supposed to be releasing this year. Bayonetta 3 still has the chance of getting delayed, but they've recently reconfirmed it's still coming out this year. So Xenoblade and Splatoon are coming up, in the next few months at the end of summer, early fall. Bayonetta 3, in theory, could come out anytime. I kind of think October, because I believe Bayonetta 2 came out in October of 2014. And so they could cover, I think it would be August, September, and October, right? Could be Xenoblade, Splatoon, and Bayonetta 3, if I'm remembering those release dates right. Either way, I feel like those are the games we have a great chance at hearing updates about, right? Because they're all coming up soon in the back half of the year. Bayonetta 3, I feel, would for sure show up and actually have an official release date and hopefully an updated trailer showcasing more of the gameplay and more of the story. I feel like that's almost a lock, provided the game isn't supposed to be delayed. And then again, the typical updates about Splatoon and Xenoblade, yeah, I think we're going to see that stuff. Obviously, Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 is top of mind, I think, for all of us. And even though the game did recently get delayed from this year into next year, spring 2023, which is a very interesting time frame, I still think that this is an optimal time for them to really talk about and blow the doors open on Breath of the Wild 2. Especially because if they stick to spring next year, and I kind of am still predicting it's going to get delayed again to the end of the year, but let's pretend for the sake of argument it is sticking to spring next year, that means that this year's E3, we're calling it E3 even though there is no E3, this is their last E3 time frame, their summer time frame, to really talk about it before it would release, okay? If it gets delayed again, then next year's E3 could be that time instead, but right now they're telling us spring, so that gives this the last summer for them to talk about it. And I think they would again talk about maybe in a specific direct at the end of the year as well, to be fair. But I just overall am ultimately feeling that we would hear some significant updates about Breath of the Wild 2 at this, theorized June Nintendo Direct. Maybe the title, hopefully a reconfirmation of the release date, and let's finally see the gameplay. Let's finally see the world. Let's finally understand the story and the context and the setting. That has to be coming before the end of this year. Yes, it might come in a later direct during the fall, but I really think if they have a June direct that there is a great chance we get a bunch of that information. Then we come to the Big Daddy, and you guys know I can't go any Nintendo Direct conversation without talking about my favorite franchise, Metroid. I have to talk about Metroid. It's what I'm put on this planet to do for you guys, is talk about Metroid. So obviously Metroid Prime 4 is the only confirmed game we know about. I want to believe there's a chance we see Metroid Prime 4 talked about in a June Direct, and I do think there is a pretty good chance. I've gone back and forth on it, but I think I'm still going to rest on 50-50 that we get some sort of update or tease or mention of Metroid Prime 4. The big blowout I still think is either going to be at the end of this year or early next year. Could it get mentioned and touched on, though? Yes. The other thing, though, is some sort of final confirmation that we've been waiting on for years about a Metroid Prime Trilogy remaster or the rumored Metroid Prime 1 remake, which is actually what I'd like to see happen, I think that this is going to be the time. If Nintendo is planning a Nintendo Direct this month, this week, next week, sometime soon in the E3 window, yes, I think we are finally going to hear what's going on with some sort of Metroid Prime re-release on the Switch. Whatever form it takes, Trilogy, Prime 1, Remaster, Remake, any combination of the above, whatever they're doing to bring the older Prime game or games to the Switch, this has to be the time. I believe it in my bones. We are finally going to hear about it and see something real and official. A slight tease for Prime 4 info sometime soon, but mostly focused on some kind of confirmation about older Prime games coming to the Switch. Now, beyond that, of course, we're going to get the smatterings of, indie games, collections about other third-party releases coming to the Switch. Of course, we're going to get maybe a big surprise or two, and I've talked at length about what that could be. A new Mario Kart, Pikmin 4, I don't know, some other weird surprise thing. The return of a different franchise like Kid Icarus or Punch-Out or whatever, Star Fox, a new IP. Yes, one of those things is going to happen. There's always a big new surprise with every big E3 or Summer Direct. So we would get something new that we don't know about, almost for sure. And that's very exciting. I think the only other thing to talk about to kind of wrap this, conversation up would be if there's a chance that Nintendo isn't actually going to hold a Nintendo Direct in June like we all expect them to. And is there a chance they don't do it? Yeah, of course there is. There's always a chance. All anyone is doing right now is speculating and guessing and theorizing based on trends, based on what we're used to Nintendo doing, based on the fact that we're seeing Microsoft and Summer Games Fest and EA and other companies do things as well. And so we expect Nintendo to follow suit because it makes a ton of sense, but it's not a lock until Nintendo confirms and announces it, right? We're all just guessing. I myself, as a fan, am just guessing. And so, would I put money on a Nintendo Direct happening in June? Yes, I would. I'm putting money right now saying they're going to do it. But what if they don't do it? We have to be prepared for that, and it would be disappointing. Prepare for disappointment, right? That's the meme and the joke. And I think that that's a good way to try to protect our feelings from, getting hurt, I guess, if Nintendo decides not to hold a Direct this month. I would say that if they don't hold a Direct this month, I think they're still going to be planning something soon. At this point, every few months, they're going to be giving us a new Direct and new updates about a variety of their products and games. There's no reason for them not to do it sometime soon. So even in a world where it doesn't happen in June, we'd have to think July or August they're going to be doing something at that time, because they can't go radio silent forever. 2020 was the weird pandemic year, but we've already gotten out of that time, and last year they returned to regular Nintendo Directs. This year we got a regular Nintendo Direct, a great one, in February. It's now been 4 months. Why wouldn't they do one during the summer? June, July, August. If we don't see one in June, yeah, it's going to be crazy disappointing, but it doesn't mean Nintendo Directs are dead forever, right? We'll start talking about why they probably will do one in July. Because at some point, no matter how common it becomes for us to guess about Nintendo Directs, at some point, they do happen. Nintendo does do these things. They are part of their business model and their hype cycle. So it's going to happen even if it doesn't happen in June. And so that's what I wanted to say about that. And so at this point, I think that's everything I have to say about it for now. I just wanted to kind of get myself back on camera and in front of my microphone for you guys to discuss and reconfirm that I do believe we're going to see a Nintendo Direct soon. It's probably going to be announced sometime this week, Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. Probably going to happen on Thursday, or it's going to be announced for the following week. It's either this next week or the week after, basically the first half of June. I just don't see a world where they don't do it. It's E3 time, it's summertime, their direct competition is doing it. Why wouldn't they follow suit? We know they have information to offload onto us and share with the world about Bayonetta and Splatoon and Zelda and Xenoblade and Metroid and any other franchises or surprises that they want to do. Their third-party releases that they want to promote. Their indie games that they want to promote. They've got a ton of stuff to tell us about. So why wouldn't they do it in June? I just think it's going to happen. So This is what I think, and this is what I have to say. What do you think about my discussion and your own thoughts and predictions about it below? And with that, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and we'll catch you next time on another video.